Thank you, Jill. Our final speaker today is Steve O'Connor. There's not much to say about Steve that hasn't already been said, but let me try. He's the former university librarian here at the Polytechnic University of Hong Kong, where he spent several years. He is also, prior to that, he was the director of CUHK in Australia, and prior to that he was a university librarian in Australia in a number of institutions. Since leaving Hong Kong, read not retiring, since leaving Hong Kong, Steve is now the Director of Information Exponentials Australia. He is based on a large rural property in northern New South Wales, and I'm telling you it's large, really large. And, you know, given Steve's great accomplishments throughout his professional career, he has one final driving ambition, and that is to own and ride a tractor. Steve O'Connor.
Thank you, Peter. I'll see you later. I'm very, very pleased to be back in Hong Kong. Ni Men Hao. Yao Peng Yao. Ni Men Gao Jing Ma. I better stop now before I say something wrong. So thank you for making me welcome. I very much appreciate that. This, of course, is the view from Hong Kong, a city which I love, and Wo Ai, Hong Kong. And this is the view from the splendid acres in northern New South Wales, currently in that photograph in flood. And so it's quite spectacular country. But I'm here today to talk about leadership, much in the way as Jill has talked about leadership, and to acknowledge that in my professional career I have always regarded my responsibility as a leader to encourage future leaders. And so the program which I would like to describe this afternoon, Next Gen, is really about fulfilling that responsibility that I felt to instill in my existing staff and other staff the skills and the opportunity to lead. I'd like also to talk about why we need to do that, and to talk about some of the elements of reconceptualising our position of risk and what kind of skills we need. But the attributes of a librarian were very neatly described by Colin Story in an article in a very, very good journal called Library Management, if you know it. But I think Colin articulated the need for an outgoing personality, the need to be brave and persistent, the need to be quick thinking and articulate of speech, you know, for the circumstances you find yourself in, and to have a political sense, which needs to be very sharp at times, and the need to possess a yin-yang combination of steadfastness and humility. And those who know Colin know that the latter is lacking. But whether you subscribe to this view that Colin's articulated or not, I personally think it's a very good description. But in terms of thinking about the leaders for the future, what kind of skills do we want to talk about? And what kind of abilities do you need to look at? Because we find our business models as librarians and as publishers very much disrupted by a range of factors. And this particular chart of the extinction timeline you probably have seen. And if you have seen it, you probably can't read it. And so I thought I'd just articulate a few of those issues. And by 2013, this particular author said that getting lost will be extinct. And certainly I think that's the case. You know, we've got our GPS, we've got our iPhones, and you should never have an excuse for getting lost. So getting lost is... oh dear. is never going to happen. 2018, this particular author postulated that libraries would be extinct. And I suspect that people in this room don't believe that, but there's certainly a lot of people out there who do believe that. And therefore, as leaders of our profession, how can you articulate a vision? How can you lead your own community into a future which is better? And certainly Haipeng was talking about copyright this morning. And if copyright were to be extinct by 2020, what kind of environment would we be in? And how would you lead the library that you're engaged with? It's certainly a very challenging concept, but it's one which I certainly believe could very well be the case. So the Next Gen program was started, was sponsored by PolyU, and the idea was to avoid block experiences, so that where you go onto a course for 3 or 4 days, you come back, and after a week you've forgotten everything. We wanted to try and extend it over a longer period. We also recognised that living here in Hong Kong, you cannot isolate yourself from the region. And so a strong element of the program was to engage people in Singapore and in Shanghai. And certainly other countries and provinces could be engaged as well. But because over the years to come, the people who are on the course would be working and liaising with other professionals in the region. And so it was essential, in our belief, to try and have that. And certainly to try and give people the chance to grow as people and to be able to look at problems differently to what they had before. And so the Next Gen Leadership Program began in 2011. And this program was sponsored by the directors of the UGC universities here in Hong Kong, by the the directors of the 2 major universities in Singapore, Nanyang and NUS, and as well as Shanghai Jiantong. And those people met and they followed the program. And so they followed, the focus of the program was to try and design the services which would be required by the next generation of library users and to develop tools and programs to be able to do that. The program was conducted by Annie Tauf and Monica Redden, and Peter was engaged as a consultant on the program, as was the Director of IT at PolyU, and a number of civic leaders here in Hong Kong, because illustrating the fact that libraries don't exist in a vacuum. And the civic leaders, I think, provided a very interesting dimension as to the politics of making public enterprises work here in Hong Kong. So the program began with a one-day workshop running, the first workshop ran over 3 days at PolyU, and then it concluded with a workshop some 6 months later. But during the interregnum, all the staff worked in groups on developing the kind of services, using the skills, using the programs that they'd learnt in the first workshop, and to bring them to the second workshop. They were not only developing what kind of services were required, but they were working with people in different areas of the region, so in Hong Kong, Singapore and in Shanghai. And they've developed that kind of relationship. In terms of the evaluation of the program, it's clear, looking at these 3 columns, that there was a great degree of agreement, or strong agreement, that they found in the program the opportunity to practice new ways of doing things. And you don't always get the chance to do that on the job. They were able to think differently about issues, and particularly there's a strong agreement there about thinking about things differently, or thinking about things you don't think about. And you don't always get the chance in the hurly-burly of life to do that. And finally, to gain confidence in using different approaches. So they learnt different ways of approaching the issues. They also had more confidence in their ability to do the job on the job. They felt more confident about applying for more senior positions. I need to get further back as I need to be able to read this. You know. But they were able to take on greater responsibilities, and they felt less fear about doing things. And finally, I can't read the last one. But I think that gives some indication of the success to those participants of a program, and that it ran over a longer period rather than normal. And this is the group photograph there. Clearly we all have different futures, don't we? You know, we all came here in different ways. We can go home in different ways. We'll make decisions about our personal lives. We'll make decisions about our professional lives in different ways. And I was wondering if you'd do me the courtesy, if you're still awake, of standing for a moment. Would you all just stand in your seat if you can, safely? Okay. Now, if everyone were to close your eyes and then point very quickly in the direction of north. Put your arm out. Lisa, you've got your eyes open. I can see that. Okay. If you opened your eyes now, you can see that people are pointing in all different directions, and some are even pointing upwards. So have a seat anyway. Thank you. I think what this simply indicates is how differently we all think, and that if we're talking about consortia, we're talking about the difficulty of moving from an organisation into a consortia and the management behaviours you need. If you are to be promoted to be in charge of a library, a small library, a large library, whatever, you'll develop certain managerial skills and traits to be able to achieve that position. But then, having got there, then you have to learn different management behaviours to work in a consortium, because you get a lot of very big egos bumping around in a group. Not in a nasty way, but everyone's used to getting their own way if you're in charge of a library. But in a consortium, you've got different behaviours. And so I think the example of where North is, it is actually in that direction, because I've got the definitive iPhone. How do you get all your staff? How do you get members of a consortium all going in that single direction? And that takes a lot of skill. If you're aware of the website called Innocentive, it's a website developed because a particular chemical company in the States had teams and teams of PhD students or staff working on particular problems, and they were finding it difficult to solve a number of those problems. And so they created a website. And on that website they put the most tedious problems and said that if anyone can solve them, they would pay them $25,000 for each problem. And the website went up. A week passed, 2 weeks passed, 3 weeks, 4 weeks passed, and then gradually solutions started to come in. Not from chemical engineers, but from computer scientists, from people in different or allied disciplines. And because those people were able to see it, because they were not insiders. The chemical engineers were insiders, and these other people were outsiders. And it's my belief that we all need to become outsiders if we are going to believe or understand and to be able to point in the future direction. Outsiders do not need to see the whole environment, but they can see the problems there rather than people who have become immersed with the problems and living through them too much. Disruption, which I talked about earlier, is evident in so many things that are happening in our professional lives. And it can lead to a lot of uncertainty as to which direction, what programs to put in, how to train staff, how to organise staff. But with that uncertainty comes a great deal of opportunity and risk. And risk is something which we talked a lot about during Next Gen. And risk is not failure. You can't equate risk with failure. It's not synonymous at all. But risk is rather a measure of the probability of success or failure. And so there is a certain amount of risk or risk of failure in whatever we do, but it's not failure in itself. And so engagement with risk in a disrupted environment such as we have, and we will continue to have, becomes very important. And Thomas Watson, who was one of the heads of in the early days of IBM, said that if you want to succeed, you've got to double your failure rate. So leadership, in my view, is an ordinary thing done by ordinary people, but done with conviction. It's not having all the answers. I do not believe, I've never had all the answers. I've had very few of them. But if you're a leader, you've got to be able to bring your people with you in that direction that you wish to go and convince them that they can go in that direction. And being able to identify people with talent and to nurse or nurture that talent in the right directions. And certainly to have a commitment to make a difference and to see it through. Not to be putting it in place and then letting it ride. You've got to really put it into place and listen as you're making it all happen. So good leaders certainly are born with a personality, interpersonal and intrapersonal skills. They're learnt on the job, through programs such as what Jill described or Next Gen, and mentors. But I think every university librarian or every leader needs to be very conscious of the cultural differences which will exist, in this case between the Philippines and Thailand, between mainland China, between Dalu and Hong Kong. They're all very different and they need to be taken into account. But I think we need to protect those differences and to celebrate whatever convergences we can have. And this is where Next Gen tried to do that. It tried to recognise that there are differences, but the people in Hong Kong would learn from the people in Shanghai and from Singapore and vice versa. It makes for a richer environment. And so here we are, sitting at the desk and waiting for the door of opportunity and ideas to arise in our leadership. So what should we be doing, in my view, and that is to celebrate, encourage and mentor young managers and put in place consistent multi-sector programs, build program partners across a region. I particularly believe that if we'd stayed just in Hong Kong, we reinforce the culture in Hong Kong without introducing new elements to it. We need to identify the talent, even if not all of them succeed in becoming Tushu Guam Guan Zhang. We're not necessarily saying that they will all become chiefs, but they'll all develop the skills, to improve. And so in this field of many flowers, the possibilities abound. And those who lead will have to take some risks in this particular world. And so if you wanted to, you could read this book. Peter and I recommend it to you. I'll move on. Anyway, but Cherchez Daja.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you for the